Welcome to the LSU NCBRT Preparedness Podcast. I'm your host, Ashley Markle. I am a curriculum development specialist here at NCBRT, and I work in collaboration with subject matter experts to create valuable and timely training for the responder community. The National Center for Biomedical Research and Training provides mobile training to both the national and international emergency response community. This series includes discussion of potentially troubling topics, including physical, verbal, psychological, and sexual abuse, oftentimes against children. So please take care if you are listening with children or anyone who might be sensitive to these issues. If you or someone you know may be involved in human trafficking, please contact the National Human Trafficking Hotline at 1-888-373-7888 or visit www.humantraffickinghotline.org. And for any other resources provided by our guests, please go ahead and check out our show notes. Welcome back to the podcast. Today, I'm joined by Maria Santamaria, Maggie Varela, and Victor Williams as we start a new series discussing human trafficking and its many implications for our communities. So thank you, everybody, for joining us today. To start, can we go ahead and go around and introduce yourselves, starting with Maria?
Yes, hi. My name is Maria Santamaria. I am with Embrace House, Inc., which is an organization, or I should say a ministry based out of Calvary Church in Miami. I have been working with victims of trafficking since 2011, mentoring them. And pretty much what we do is we walk alongside the victims. We try to reintroduce them to what we call a normal life. And we're just there for them for anything they need.
Thank you. Maggie?
Well, welcome everyone. So honored to be here. My name is Maggie Varela. I'm a retired lieutenant with the Miami-Dade Police Department. I finished my last 10 years out of our Counterterrorism and Homeland Security Bureau. During that time, I had our tech support assigned to us, which worked hand in hand with our human trafficking squads. So we were in a support model, but I definitely learned so much about human trafficking and how it's a national problem, something that we need to all address together, and that it doesn't just happen elsewhere, it happens here. So I'm so honored to be a part of this. Thank you, Ashley.
And last but not least, Victor, take it away.
Thanks, Ashley. My name is Victor Williams. I'm a retired special agent with Homeland Security Investigations. The last 8 years of my career, I worked human trafficking, and it changed me as a human being. When I retired in 2018, I worked for an organization called Erase Child Trafficking, where we traveled around the country educating law enforcement, police departments on human trafficking. And then I had a couple years of team security for the Atlanta Hawks. I didn't really get out of human trafficking 100%, but I did do a little bit more security work in that space. But when I left the Hawks after 2 years, I became the human trafficking coordinator for the state of Georgia, which gave me a different perspective on addressing this issue from a state level. In 2021, I left that position, came back to Miami, and in 2023, January of 2023, I started Quest to Freedom, which is a 501 anti-human trafficking organization where we seek to educate communities, private businesses, governments, and government entities on the cultural awareness of human trafficking. We partner with other organizations because we know no one can work in this space alone, but our ultimate goal is to raise enough funds that we register with the national hotline to fill gaps such as when police or service providers finds victims, they may not have a space to put that victim. So we want to be able to get them a hotel for a night or however long they need. If home is safe, we want to be able to provide them a bus ticket, plane ticket, or train ticket back home to get them in that safe environment where they can start their healing process. So we look to fill gaps. And so that's what I'm doing now.
Thank you all for joining us today. We're really excited about this series. So to start us off, can you briefly define human trafficking and especially explain how it differs from things like human smuggling and prostitution?
Okay, I'll take that one. So, just to get there, let's start with a little bit of history. We didn't get our human trafficking laws until the year 2000 when the Trafficking Victims Protection Act came about. And when that law came about in the year 2000, it defined human trafficking as three elements needed to have a human trafficking case, and that's force, fraud, and coercion. What we must know about those elements is that those elements only apply to adults. So if you're a child under the age of 18 and you're in some type of commercial sexual exploitation, you are a victim hands down. We don't need to have any of those elements. There are other parts of the law that says, transporting, harboring. Those are parts of the law, but you have to have one of those elements to have a human trafficking case. Um, and to distinguish between human trafficking and and smuggling, basically when you're talking smuggling, human smuggling, you're talking a crime against the border. Someone pays someone to sneak them in the country and they're free to go. If you're talking human trafficking, that's a crime against a person. Whether you're coming across a border or you're born in whatever city you're born and someone is trafficking you personally. So the difference, crime against the border, crime against the person, and you can have both of those situations.
Yeah. So can you tell us about some of the risk factors for becoming a victim of human trafficking?
Okay, I'll take that one too. So when I get asked that question about victims, I honestly, and I know this is true, human trafficking victims and traffickers are created in homes all around the world. And what I mean by that is that when you see human trafficking victims, what makes them vulnerable to becoming a victim are unresolved trauma. Unresolved trauma could be anything from, trauma that was passed to your parents from their parents, whether that trauma is physical abuse, mental abuse, verbal abuse, any type of trauma of, say, parents dying, parents divorcing, parents being incarcerated. What we call these things are, they're known as ACEs, and I always forget the A in ACEs, but they have to deal with the different types of traumas that you go through. And so when you have one of four ACEs, I mean 4 to 5 ACEs in your life growing up as a kid, that means like your family could have gone through a divorce. One of your parents died. You could have been physically, mentally abused. And the more ACEs that you add up in your life as a child, and those issues haven't been resolved, this could leave you open and vulnerable for looking for love, for looking for someone to care. And when you're open and you're out searching for love and searching for attachment, depending on who you come in contact with, they can exploit you for those needs. So I always say, especially when it comes to the coercion part of the element, this is the part that will take whatever you think you need and use it against you. Hey, I need you to go sell your body or you're going to get kicked out of the house. I need you to go sell your body or I'm not going to feed you or I'm not going to give you your drugs. So whatever those needs you feel that are very important to yourself, be careful because those needs can become a reason that people are exploited.
Those are
Also,
really great points. Oh, go ahead, Maria.
just to piggyback on what Vic just said, basic needs such as food, clothing, um, shoes. I mean, you take a child that hasn't had a brand new pair of shoes or who's in need of shoes that has lived on the streets and you offer them those shoes, now you have them. okay, I'll give you these shoes, but you need to go do this for me. You need to go do that for me. And it's just, the need is so big. I think that's definitely one of the biggest exposures to trafficking, for potential victims, just basic needs.
Yeah, and along with that, a lot of false pretenses, right? They're trying to offer them a new life, a better life, maybe to become models, famous, somewhere else, and they offer to fly them somewhere or take them there and promise them the world. And then unfortunately, we come to find out that once they're there, and I know, Victor, you've touched upon that when we've had conversations, they take all of their travel documents, their identification, and so on. And then on top of that, they kind of have them as prisoners for themselves, for them, and at the same time also use those needs to keep them there and wanting more, unfortunately, of staying, not wanting to do what they are required to do, but just keep them in that situation. And we talk about also gang members, that they use those similar type of tactics in trying to get young kids to join gangs, because they want a sense of belonging. They want to have something that's, their family life is not good, so this becomes their family. But unfortunately, along with that belonging comes all these negative things that unfortunately they start getting involved in. And they get them into drugs, they get them into, criminal activity. And the same thing, unfortunately, for human trafficking victims, either for sexual exploit or even for work exploit. So yeah, it's very concerning.
And I apologize for not knowing this. I guess I just had a mental small gap there. But when I talk about ACEs, I'm talking about the adverse child experiences. And so when we talk about adverse child experiences, they're like physical, sexual, verbal, physical or emotional neglect, separation or divorce, a family member with mental illness, a family member that's addicted to drugs or alcohol, a family member who is in prison, witness a parent being abused. So these are a list of adverse child experiences. And when you have these adverse child experiences and they're not resolved as you're going through these issues, this becomes vulnerability. Unresolved trauma creates vulnerability, which traffickers are masters at exploiting. And they do that by a way of what we call grooming. They meet you, they're very nice to you. And the big thing that we learn, especially from children, is that these traffickers make the children believe that they're listening to them. Through my experiences, as parents, we do a lot. We work hard. We sacrifice a lot to put our children in safe environments, a nice home, food on the table. But when you ask kids what they really want from their parents, they just want their time and attention. So depending on the type of standards that we set for our children, do I need the big 5-bedroom house or do I need the 3-bedroom house? The higher the standards, the higher the cost, which may mean, the more sacrifice that the parents are doing, working, which keeps them away from the children. 2 parents working, which can take both parents away from the children. So, and I say in a cultural, mental kind of thing, that if we have all these nice things for our kids, we make them safe and comfortable. But when it comes to just communicating, our kids just want our attention and time. So it's so important that parents think about these things and know about this stuff, because that's part of culture, right? We all want the big house, the nice car, thinking this is making us safe or whatever. But when it comes to our kids, they just really need our time and attention to help them through some of these issues that they may be having.
And Vic, some of the girls that I've worked with have expressed that, what you just described. And they said it was lack of attention I was needing, and somebody picked up on what I needed. And I want to say at least 6 of the girls have told me, pay attention to what your kids wear. There's a change in habit. There's a change in just the way they do things. All of a sudden, they start wearing this fancy clothes. Where did you get it if I didn't buy it for you as a parent? Where did you get those shoes? How did you get your nails done? And those are sometimes things that we overlook because of what you said. We're so busy going that I could say, oh, my friend Maggie paid for my nails. And I'll say, okay, just because it's easier to keep going and ignore that little sign. It's that simple.
Exactly. Great point, Maria.
And along with that, one thing that's really important that both of you have touched upon is the fact that not only do we need to connect with our kids, know what they're doing, where they are, but also be aware that these things are happening as parents, and also educate our kids. Because I'll be honest with you, before I started working with the Human Trafficking Squad in our counterterrorism division, this was an eye-opener for me. And I had that misconception that a lot of people have that, oh, these things don't happen here. They happen in other countries. They happen in other areas. They don't happen here. And that was a huge eye-opener for me. Which I learned a great deal about it. I have 3 daughters, which at the time were young daughters that could have been subject to this, and I sat them down and explained to them what it was, what are some of the tactics that they use, how to communicate with me if they come involved with someone like that. So I think it's also very important, not only as parents to educate our kids, but also as law enforcement, that are the frontline individuals that are aware that it's not something that's another problem in another country. That's a problem that's deep here in the heart of our nation, and we need to identify this, accept it, and try to take, understand and have steps in place to change it and recognize it.
Yeah, and that's a good point, Maggie. A lot of people hear the word trafficking and they assume it's coming from somewhere else. But you could be born wherever you are. I live in Miami. You could be born in Miami and trafficked in Miami. But I will say, when it comes to labor trafficking, which is 60 to 70% of all trafficking, we focus a lot on sex trafficking, but labor trafficking is where we're all involved. From products we buy, we don't know if they were made with child labor or if people are being treated properly. So labor trafficking is where we all are connected. But what I would say about labor trafficking, the majority of victims that are labor trafficked do come from other countries, because a lot of times these people have document issues. And these them being here with document issues is that vulnerability that they have. And if you don't work these extra hours, if you don't take this less pay, even to the fact, if you don't have sex with me, I'm going to turn you into Homeland Security. So you need to do all these things and work these hours and all of that. So that's where you will have most of your labor trafficking issues do come from people who are here undocumented.
Thank you. So kind of going along with that discussion of victims, how does a person become a trafficker themselves, kind of on the other side of things?
Well, I would say the same thing. I mean, those same issues that a victim have at home, those adverse child experiences. If you are, say for instance, let's just say we do have female traffickers, but let's say in the male trafficking world, you grew up watching your father beat your mother, and that became a norm. I've met females that believe if the husband wasn't beating them or the significant other wasn't beating them, that wasn't love, but that was what they knew. So this is really mental. So if you come from a family that's what's happening, that could be your norm. So when you're looking at the perpetrator of this, that's where this starts, at home, watching how the father treat the mother. If you're a kid that was raised by a single family, a single parent, and you don't have a positive male role model in your life, and those male role models that you are identifying with are gang members in your neighborhood, or because that's all you have access to, right? If that's what you know, we live in a world of, we only know what we know. And I can remember actually interviewing a trafficker that when I heard his story, it was like the kid never had a chance. He was born in a drug-infested neighborhood. Every day he walked out his door, he had to deal with those people to survive. And so that is where he got this from. And that's all he had to reference, So it's really an environment and cultural aspect, depending on, your childhood adverse experiences, where this takes you. Because we do have female traffickers too that could be on the other side of that. But all of this started at home, and with these issues that were never resolved.
And you know what? I want to go back to what you said. It's on what you learn at home. What are you teaching? Let's take boys, for example. What are you teaching your boys? Are you teaching your boys to be respectful of women, their sister, their aunt, their grandmother, their own mother? Are you teaching them that it's not okay to look at certain magazines because that is somebody's daughter, somebody's sister, somebody's mother? What are we teaching? It goes back to education.
Definitely. I know on a presentation I done recently on my last slide, and it's true, real men don't buy women. Real men don't buy women, And so if we were living in a culture that this is something that we all believe and stood by, and from the day you were born, you were hearing this, most likely you would not be one of those people that go out seeking to buy women, because that's a culture within itself. As a male raised in America, I was introduced to all of this stuff. There is a time where guys go to different places like, oh, where you going? I'm going to Santo Domingo. Why? Because cheap to buy sex. I'm going to Rio. Why? Because cheap to buy sex. This is a culture. And this is what I talk about when I do my presentations. It's a culture that perpetuates this problem. It started it, and it's perpetuating the problem. And these are the things that we need to address with our families, with our young men, our young women. We need to have these discussions so that whether you're a perpetrator or a victim, you can start understanding that process, how men are going to come at you, how they're going to groom you. Be careful of the information you give to people. I tell parents, if you're allowing your kids to play games, have rules that they're not allowed to communicate. They're not allowed to give personal, private information because there are grown men pretending to be kids to get that type of information to see if they can suck your kids in to providing information, meeting them even out of playing this game. Hey, I live in Miami too. Can we meet somewhere? I mean, these are all factors. And every time I get to talk to children, these are the three things I ask. Who has access to the internet? They raise their hands. Who talk to people online that they don't know? They raise their hands. How many of you have actually gone out and met people that you met online? And unfortunately, some of them have raised their hands.
Let me add to that, Vic. What about taking a photo and sending it to somebody who you don't know is on the other side? It's very simple. I mean, totally what Vic said is totally true, but sometimes you don't even have to meet the person because once you send a nude picture to someone, it's out there. So now you know what? The trafficker will tell you, if you don't do this, if you don't do A, B, C, I'm going to send the pictures to your entire school. If you don't do A, B, C, I'm going to send it to your parents. And now they have those kids hooked simply because the kids don't want to be put out there. They don't want to be ashamed. Again, it's that simple.
And that's an excellent point, Maria, because that's how we're seeing a lot of our young men get caught up in this now. They could be on dating apps, or here's this really cute girl reaching out to you. Hey, you look handsome, whatever, and start this relationship over the phone. And next thing you know, you're sending photos, and you're sending photos exposing yourself. And then they start using that to blackmail you to get you to do things that you don't want. So that's an excellent point.
It's like that online bullying, but if you give them the ammunition to use against you, then unfortunately that's what they're going to use. And then, like you said, they have you kind of in their hand. They have you grabbed by some sense that they're going to be able to control you based on that. So those are great points. And once again, it comes to communicating, changing the culture. Victor, I love when you use the word of culture, because whether you're a man or a woman, you need to learn, and you need to also train your family members, your kids, that no matter what that person is, they're still a human being and they have rights, and you're victimizing them. If you do these things, you are victimizing them. So it's just to make it clear to them that it's never okay. It's never okay.
you. So, kind of wrapping up this conversation today, and I know we've touched a little bit on this, um, but why is it crucial to have a clear and compassionate understanding of the emotional and cultural underpinnings of human trafficking?
I look at this. If you look at a lot of other issues that come out of families, alcoholism, drug addiction, depression, PTSD, I don't think it's just a human trafficking issue. I think we all need to have some training in adverse child experiences to understand what we're doing to our children, what was done to us. And if we don't break that chain, it's called generational trauma. It's called generational because parents got it from their parents and we're giving it to our kids. If somebody in that chain doesn't break that line of trauma, then it's just going to continue. And so I think this conversation, even outside of human trafficking, we need to start having these discussions because nobody's really talking about this stuff. You know, we're all private. Nobody really wants to talk about their issues, but there's no such thing as a perfect family, you know, and especially children need to know, because if home isn't safe, and I tell children all the time, you have to find one adult that got your back 100%. Because some of the things that we haven't mentioned here is familiar trafficking. A lot of this stuff happens at home with family members trafficking in their own family. One of the statistics that we throw on our website, we say it's over 50 million people are in a trafficking situation. And what takes those numbers to that next level, something that we're not talking about, child forced marriages. And I know in America, we have at least 5 to 7 states that will allow a 12-year-old to marry an adult with the family's permission. These are things we're not talking about. And these are things that we need to know. So this podcast, exposing us to human trafficking, but exposing us to a deeper cause or a deeper understanding for our personal life, livelihood, because we've all have had trauma. The question is that trauma controlling us or we controlling it? So the awareness that you're bringing from this podcast, just in those family dynamics, is so important because it can go beyond trafficking.
And I just want to add a little bit about compassion. And again, let's not just talk about trafficking. Anybody who's a victim of anything or anybody who has trauma, we need to remember there's a life. There's a broken person we're dealing with. And this goes out to everybody, but mainly advocates and people working hand in hand with victims. Sometimes they're very hard to work with. They're angry, they're hurt, they're sad. Why should they trust you? We have to remember we're dealing with human beings. We're dealing with people who have been raped, with people who have been beaten, with people whose identity has been taken from them, completely taken from them. You don't want to be the next person that either abuses them or lets them down. So we need to take this very, very seriously. And we go back to education. So don't forget compassion. It's very important to make somebody feel valued after being abused and stripped of their dignity.
Yeah, that's a great point. And if I could please address the law enforcement side of this a moment, is some agencies are really doing a great job of educating law enforcement officers on the whole human trafficking situation in our nation. But just as importantly, I think we need to remember, when I had a squad, I was always like reminding people, listen, even when you do a traffic stop or when you're dealing with calls for service, remember these people are humans. How would you want your family member to be treated if they're dealing with an officer? Pretend that's your mother, or could have been your mother or your daughter or your sister. How would you have wanted someone to treat them, right? And these are actual victims. Unfortunately, there's a lot of the mentality that these are subjects, that they're criminals themselves, right? So they have to be reminded that in these human trafficking circumstances, they are victims. They did not choose to come here, or if they did choose, it was by false pretenses, and then those choices have brought them into a situation that's a horrendous situation. So we have to remember to kind of embrace these individuals not as subjects, but as victims of this circumstance, of this horrific crime, and make sure that we treat them accordingly. Because we want them, like you said, Maria, if we don't do that, they're going to shut down, and we're not going to be able to get the information not only to help them, but also in addition to try and get these traffickers, try and get as much information as we can to try and hopefully stop the problem altogether, at least one at a time, right?
And that's great that you mentioned that, because that's one of the first things they're taught. Law enforcement are not your friends. And it's what you said. They'll shut down. There went your case. There went the rescue. And that victim is back into that same situation.
And Maria, I just want to add this one piece. A lot of people get into this work. They have really good intentions. But a lot of people get in this work, have these same issues, right? And so when you're trying to help a victim and you don't really understand your issues, but you have a little compassion, you want to help, but then people in this space start using, well, look what happened to me. I got out of it. Why can't you? We start applying our own cultural mechanisms that may not always be healthy. That's why from a class that I took at St. Thomas University at the Human Trafficking Academy to refresh myself, the biggest thing that I got out of that was that anybody that's going to get involved in this work must have a really good training. I know your heart feels good and you want to help, but if you don't get training to understand the deep dive dynamics of this, you can end up doing more harm to the victim, let alone yourself. Because working in this space, you're dealing with other people's traumas. So you got to be able to have a mechanism for yourself that you're not letting those traumas bring more trauma to yourself. So you have to work in a space that we're taking care of each other, that you're doing stuff to keep your head clear so that those traumas you're dealing with are not harming you, but more so that you're not causing further harm because you haven't dealt with it. So it's so important. Training is so important in this space to anybody that's working in it.
Totally agree, Vic.
Me too. Training and like you said, bringing the compassion, not just for that victim, but understanding that individual, that you need to leave your ego at the door. Number one, you need to leave your judgment at the door, because this is not a place for judgment. This is a place to try and understand what's happening, try and get as much information as you can from that victim, because they are a victim, and you don't know, that could have been someone's daughter, someone's child, someone's son. You have to kind of think. At least I really try to tell my guys to think about the mentality. You don't know what brought them to that situation. So leave your egos at the door. Don't judge. Who are we to judge on this? Just get down to the bottom nitty-gritty, see how we can help them. And I love that Maria uses that word of rescue, because this is a rescue. Sometimes I think that we're more focused on, and I love dogs, don't get me wrong. I just rescued one myself, as a matter of fact. But sometimes we're more focused on that than we are, how do we rescue our own human beings, our own, beings that live with us. How can we help these children that are in these cases, or these women, or even these labor workers? We need to bring that training forward, Victor, like you said, so that people understand that this is a victim crime. This is not a crime, like you said, only against the border. These are individuals that are being victimized every single day in horrendous ways.
Thank you to Maria, Maggie, and Victor for sharing with us today. Next time, we'll dive into some of the current problems and challenges that communities are facing when addressing human trafficking. If you have any questions or topic suggestions for future episodes, please send us an email at podcast@ncbrt.lsu.edu. Make sure you subscribe to the LSU NCBRT Preparedness Podcast wherever you listen to podcasts.